The movie starts with a magical moving house called Howl's Moving Castle. We then meet 18-year-old Sophie, who works hard at her hat shop. As she's about to close, a customer reminds her, but Sophie overhears some girls talking about Howl's fountain and decides to ignore them. On her way to her sister's house, Sophie takes a shortcut, but gets stopped by two soldiers who bother her. Just then, a mysterious boy saves her. But soon, dark, shadowy creatures start chasing Sophie. To save her, the boy, named Howl, magically lifts her into the air and takes her safely to her sister's house. Sophie's sister, Lay, happy to see her, quickly notices that Sophie seems taken with the mysterious boy who saved her. Meanwhile, in a spooky palace, someone places a small vessel, and the dark creatures following Howl are involved in it. Back at her shop, Sophie is visited by a strange woman who causes trouble. This woman, the Witch of the Waste, gets angry when Sophie asks her to leave. She uses dark magic to curse Sophie, turning her into an old woman and making it so she can't tell anyone about the curse. Sophie is shocked, but eventually accepts her new look. The next morning, her mother comes home and starts looking for her. Sophie hides in her room, pretending to be hungry to avoid showing her new appearance. After her mother leaves, Sophie checks the mirror again, but nothing has changed. Feeling hopeless, she grabs some food and leaves the house, hoping to find a cure. While eating outside the city, Sophie finds a stick stuck in a bush. When she pulls it out, it turns out to be a living scarecrow. She names it Turnip, and it starts following her and helps her find a place to stay. Fort. Tired, Sophie reaches the fort's door, says goodbye to Turnip, and goes inside. She sits by a fire to warm up and thinks about how to break the curse on Howl. The next morning, Sophie hears a knock on the door. A child named Marl tells her they're looking for a wizard named Jenkins to join the war. Sophie finds out that Howl uses the name Jenkins. Door locks again, and another girl comes to bring a protective shield for the ship. The door then opens to different places, showing a king calling Howl by the name Pendragon. Sophie, curious, opens a door of a different color and sees the river's edge. Marl explains that only Howl uses that door color. Later, Marl goes to breakfast, but they can't use the fire without Howl, because Calcifer, the fire demon, only listens to him. Sophie threatens Calcifer, saying she'll tell Howl about their deal, which makes Calcifer let her cook. While preparing breakfast, Howl arrives and recognizes Sophie as the girl he saved. He helps her and asks her name. Sophie introduces herself as his grandmother, Sophie, saying she's there to clean and keep her curse a secret. During breakfast, Howl finds a piece of paper in Sophie's pocket. When he touches it, it burns and leaves a mark on the table. Howl reads the mark, understands what's happening, and uses magic to erase it. Sophie leaves, and Marl, curious, asks if she works for the Witch of the Waste, which makes Sophie mad. Determined, she starts cleaning the castle fiercely, scaring away insects and rats with her old body. Calcifer, the fire demon, tells Sophie that he needs fresh wood soon or he'll go out. Sophie uses some burnt wood to clean up the ashes. She's about to throw out the ashes and give Calcifer new wood when he gets extinguished. Luckily, Howl arrives just in time to reignite him with his magic. Howl tells Sophie to keep working and then leaves. Sophie continues cleaning and finds the bathroom in bad shape. She opens a window to clean it, revealing a beautiful view outside. After giving Calcifer some new wood, Sophie goes to the balcony, where Marl tells her that the lake she sees is called Star Lake. Turnip, the scarecrow, has followed her and helps Sophie dry clothes outside. They enjoy the stunning view. Meanwhile, Howl, in a bird-like form, is fighting in a war but is defeated. He returns to the castle, changes back to his human form, and talks to Calcifer about the war. He sees Sophie sleeping and is surprised to find her in her younger form. Sophie wakes up to the sound of water and learns from Calcifer that Howl is back. Sophie and Marl go to Port Haven to buy supplies and see a burned ship from the war. On their way home, Sophie sees a man and rushes back to the castle with Marl. When they arrive, Howl comes down, yelling. Sophie had been cleaning the bathroom and accidentally mixed up some items, turning Howl's hair from blonde to black. Howl gets really upset and darkens the whole house. Marl explains that Howl has summoned dark spirits, something he did before when he was heartbroken. Sophie tries to comfort Howl, but green goo from him sticks to her hand. Howl is very upset, and Sophie feels awful, crying outside in the heavy rain with a blanket over her head. Marl asks her to help Howl. Sophie goes inside, helps Howl to the bathroom, and tells Marl to look after him. Then she starts cleaning up outside. Sophie brings milk for Howl, and he talks to her about his problems. Howl explains that the Witch of the Waste is after him because he once went to her for information, but was scared away. He used magic to protect himself from her. Howl also says he needs to see the king about the war, which he doesn't want to do. Sophie suggests Howl should directly tell the king he doesn't want to fight, hoping the king will stop the war. Howl is unsure but asks Sophie to go in his place as Pendragon, his mother. He also tells her to meet Madame Soulon and say Howl is useless and should be left alone. Before she leaves, Howl gives Sophie a ring for protection and promises to stay nearby in disguise. Sophie isn't sure about Howl's plan, but goes to the palace anyway. On the way, she meets a small old dog she mistakes for Howl and encounters the Witch of the Waste, who was invited by the king. The witch asks Sophie about Howl, and Sophie lies, saying Howl is scared. Sophie asks the witch to break the curse, but the witch says she can't help with that. They climb a long flight of stairs with Sophie carrying the heavy dog. Despite the challenge, Sophie reaches the top, and the witch arrives shortly after. Inside, the witch sits in a chair, and Sophie follows the dog to meet a man who takes her to Madame Soulon. Madame Soulon uses magic to see the truth about Sophie and learns that the dog, Heen, was sent by Solomon to bring Sophie there. Sophie tells Madame Soulon that Howl won't join the war because he's useless. Madame Soulon gets a bit sad and reveals that Howl was her best student, and she had high hopes for him. She explains that a demon stole Howl's heart, which is why he left. According to Madame Soulon, Howl is using his magic for selfish reasons, and if he continues, he'll end up like the Witch of the Waste. Madame Soulon then reveals that the Witch of the Waste's powers were taken away long ago. The witch was once good but made a deal with a demon for her body and soul. Madame Soulon no longer trusts witches and tells Sophie that if Howl serves the kingdom, she'll teach him how to defeat demons. If he refuses, she'll treat him like the Witch of the Waste. Sophie realizes Soulon's trap, gets upset, and defends Howl. Soulon then reveals Howl's true form and hints that Sophie has feelings for him. The Witch of the Waste also defends Howl, saying he has a good heart. Just then, the king arrives and asks Soulon to introduce Sophie. The king says he doesn't want to win the war with magic because it would only protect his kingdom while leaving the world in chaos. The real king then appears, revealing that the first king was actually Howl in disguise. Howl says goodbye to Soulon and takes Sophie away in a flying car, bringing the dog Heen with them. He tells Sophie to go back to the castle and uses a magical ring to show her the way. Howl makes Sophie invisible for 5 minutes to help her get to the castle safely. Despite Soulon's men trying to stop them, Sophie makes it back. At the castle, Sophie sees Turnip Head waiting for her but crashes into the moving castle. Soulon's men search the castle but don't find anyone. That night, Howl comes back hurt and looking bad. Sophie, now young again for some reason, searches for him and finds him turned into a giant bird. She tells him she loves him and will help break the spell. Howl says she can't break his curse until she breaks her own. Sophie then wakes up, realizing it was just a dream. She demands to know what Calcifer and Howl are hiding, but Calcifer won't tell her. Sophie threatens to put out Calcifer's fire if he doesn't cooperate. The next day, Sophie, Turnip Head, and Heen take the ship out of the castle to clean. Sophie feeds Calcifer, and Howl arrives asking her to stay. Howl tells her that Turnip Head is also under a spell. They prepare to move the castle, and Howl draws a magic circle on the ground. Calcifer moves the castle, and they find themselves back at Sophie's old home. Howl gives Sophie a magical dial to change where the door goes. He then takes her to see his childhood home. She wants to learn the truth about him. When Howl refuses to tell her, Sophie turns back into her old self. Before they can talk more, an enemy warship appears. Howl uses magic to protect Sophie, but she gets thrown back into the castle. Feeling helpless, Sophie is comforted by Marl, who tells her not to worry too much, because Howl often stays out for days. Sophie sleeps with the Witch of the Waste, who talks about her love for Howl. Sophie asks if the witch has ever loved anyone, and the witch says she loves the hearts of young boys, which is common among witches. The next morning, Sophie sees a burning house in the city and runs to greet her mother. Her mother announces she has married a rich man and invites Sophie to live with them. Sophie says no, but her mother leaves a strange creature in the house, which the Witch of the Waste feeds to Calcifer, making him sick. Marl warns Sophie about the creature, but Sophie struggles to burn Calcifer properly. The witch smokes a cigarette from a pouch left by Sophie's mother, filling the room with smoke. Sophie opens a window, which attracts enemy aircraft that start bombing. Howl arrives and takes Sophie to safety. Sophie, almost fully in her real form, tries to protect everyone while Howl leaves again. Seeing the war outside, she decides to move the castle, even though Calcifer warns her not to. Sophie takes Calcifer out, causing the castle to fall apart. Sophie, Marl, and Heen enter the wreckage and ask Calcifer to help them move again. Calcifer agrees if Sophie gives him her eye, but she gives him her braid instead. The castle is rebuilt, but Calcifer accidentally reveals that Howl's heart is with him. The Witch of the Waste grabs Calcifer, burning herself to save him. Sophie pours water on Calcifer, causing the castle to collapse. Sophie falls down a hill, crying and fearing she has killed Howl. She sees her ring glowing and follows it to find Howl's childhood door. Inside, she learns about Howl's past and his deal with Calcifer. She finds Howl's heart and gives it back to him, breaking the spell. Howl wakes up and Sophie kisses Turnip Head, breaking his curse and revealing him to be a prince. He promises to end the war. Heem tells Sulan, who announces the end of the war. Calcifer returns, and everyone lives happily ever after. The movie ends here.